Between 1914 and 1918, an entire generation of young men served king and country. Over 5.5 million British soldiers fought in the First World War. It's the biggest fighting force Britain has ever assembled. Each on enlistment became Tommy Atkins, the nickname given by the army to its soldiers. The Tommies were the first to face the horrors of modern war. Over 700,000 were killed by heavy artillery, gas, and machine guns. Many more were wounded. And when filming began in 2003, time had whittled this great army of millions down to just 27 survivors. All of them were centenarians. The oldest, 107. The youngest, 102. They lived through some of the most appalling experiences of the 20th century.
No man's land was full of dead bodies, and the smell in the summer, oh, stink like the devil.
They faced terrible choices.
He said, shoot me. He was beyond all human aid.
These men were born when Queen Victoria was still on the throne. Their lives spanned 3 centuries. Their deaths will cut forever our last connection with a distant age. Soon the final platoon of 27 veterans will be gone. Now they tell their story for the final time. Harry Patch, one of the 27 veterans. He witnessed the horrors of Passchendaele, but for 80 years he kept his First World War memories a secret. Only when he went into a nursing home at the age of 100 was Harry forced to face his war demons.
For 80 years, I never watched a war film. I never spoke of it, not to my wife.
But when night staff turned on the light in a store cupboard, the flash penetrated through a skylight into Harry's room and his dreams.
If I was half asleep, it was a flash of the bomb. That flash brought it all back.
The memories of war came more easily for Arthur Hailstrap, who was born in 1898.
Not too far, mate. Not too far.
That's it.
2 years ago, he began his 30th pilgrimage to the battlefields of Belgium and northern France to honor his fallen comrades.
May I give you a kiss?
One.
Oh, many as you like.
And again.
You know order.
His first act of remembrance was a service at Poppering in Belgium, in an attic once used as a chapel by British soldiers. He'd always walked up the 4 floors, but now he had to accept a lift from the Belgian Fire Brigade.
Thank you. Beautifully done.
Arthur may have been frail, but he was determined not to forget.
But I need a volunteer. Do you mind volunteering?
What for?
Yeah. No, for the exhortation.
Oh, no, of course. Anytime.
No, the Padre was saying...
His childhood had ended abruptly on the killing fields of the Western Front. Yet he'd grown up expecting to fight for king and country. Some of his earliest memories were of service to the British Empire.
When I was about 3 years old, I was dressed in petticoats and skirts. And I remember letters coming from my father's two brothers from the South African Boer War. And I remember the excitement at home when those letters arrived.
The Boer War had a profound effect on Arthur's generation. It was a reminder that they were expected to fight for Britain's empire. In 2003, on the edge of the Highlands, the oldest of the Tommies was still living independently.
Right, Dad. Just got to check the clock, all right?
Alfred Anderson was then aged 107. His eldest son, Jim, was 79.
Funny to think of your son being retired, isn't it? Oh. I'm supposed to be the oldest man in Scotland.
But Alfred could still remember the day in 1902 when victorious British troops returned home from the Boer War. He was 6 years old.
This Sergeant Beverly picked me up and put me on his shoulders and carried me down the street.
12 years later, at the outbreak of the First World War, Alfred was to become a soldier in the same Black Watch regiment, and Sergeant Beverly was to be his platoon sergeant. Jim Lovell was the last surviving decorated Tommy from the 1914-18 war. He started school like the rest of the Tommies at the age of 4.
We didn't have pens, we had slates with sand on, and we had a mark in the sand, writing in the sand, see, and just shake it to cover it again, see, and then we write again. We never had no paper, just a sand and a stick.
The first hour on a Thursday was geometry. Now you gave us a question. What was the shortest distance between A and B? Of course, the answer is a straight line. So what's the definition of a curve? Well, I'd forgotten it. I said a straight line called bending. And I had a rap for that.
When we come home from school, we had to take our boots off and run about with no boots at all on. And we used to play in the road, all sorts of games. Of course, a pair of boots cost 12 and 6 then, 12 and 6.
For Jim Lovell's dad, 12 and 6 was 2 weeks' wages. The quest to find the last British survivors of the First World War stretched as far as Australia.
Drop of rain coming.
The youngest of the veterans, Claude Schulz, had been living there for 77 years. Aged 102, he was still enthusing over nature's wonders on his daily walk.
Some people call it an Australian grass tree. It's a bulgur, and this is the flower. And you see how these two are wrapped together here? I don't know why they've done that. And some people call it a black fella because it's got this like a native Australian with his spear up like that, you see. So they call it a black fella. But that's not allowed now. Its proper name is Bulgar. And that's what it has to be. Come on then. Come on, my lovelies. Come on.
Claude was born in Worcestershire in 1901, in the same month that Daimler built the first Mercedes car.
Come on then. Come on. Come on, my lovelies. Come on.
He was 4 when the modern world intruded into his village at Wyrepiddle.
You had a policeman from Pershore. He rode his push bike over from Pershore one day and told us, not only us, told the farmers and the shopkeeper, tomorrow at 2 p.m. a horseless carriage is coming through your village. We'd never seen one, never heard of it even. And sure enough, at 2 o'clock the next afternoon, we gathered and we heard this chug, chug, chug. We could see him in the distance coming. And there's a bloke sitting up where the coachman would sit with the reins for 4 horses in his hands. And instead of reins, he's got a lever in each hand, and he's pushing and pulling these levers and peddling things.
As far as Claude was concerned, the first car in Wyrepiddle could well have been the last.
We couldn't see it as becoming general, no. And supplanting horse-drawn vehicles, no, never. The horses would always be on top, we would have said, then.
Come on then. There's a magpie ahead of us, you see, on the black and white bird there. Let's see, maybe he'd take some here.
Wyrepiddle may have been slow to recognise the importance of the internal combustion engine, but Claude's schoolteacher left him in no doubt about Britain's place as the world's superpower.
He had a big picture on the wall, and it was a picture of the world. And he would say, all that land marked in red belongs to Britain. And we used to cock a chest and think, blimey, we're rich, owning all that land, you know.
But the map, swathed in imperial red, was under threat. European rivals, carving out empires for themselves, were challenging Britain's supremacy.
Arthur, may I thank you very much for coming.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure to come here.
Arthur Halestrap, who as a boy walked on the deck of the Titanic in Southampton docks, was well aware that Britain and Germany were locked into a dangerous naval arms race.
The fact that the Germans were building a navy in competition with our own was well known to us, and that the Germans were trying to take some of the empire away from us.
School children, like Arthur, were constantly reminded that Britain still ruled the waves.
We were taught a song, Flag of Britain proudly waving over many distant seas, Flag of Britain boldly braving distant fog and constant breeze. Now we salute it and we pray God to bless our land today. The year before the First War, there was a huge gathering of the British Navy in the Spithead. And it was marvellous because every type of ship in the British Navy was represented there. And we were very proud of it.
That pride in Britain's status as the world's superpower would propel Arthur's generation into the coming conflict. But the war wouldn't simply be fought on the high seas. In 1913, Jim Lovell left school at the age of 14. He was about to take on a man's job blacksmithing in an ironworks.
They took me in the blacksmith shop, put me under a chap driving a steam hammer, to blow 25 tons. And he was only with me 20 minutes and he left me. And I had to manage. And these blacksmiths were chores. You do anything wrong, they come and smack you across the face.
It wasn't long before the inexperienced teenager angered one of his older workmates.
We had a big job one day. I was there about 3 hours, I think, on these brake shafts.
Jim was exhausted and needed to stop for a break. It provoked the older man to attack him, but the young apprentice was also a tough nut.
And he come on me out in the chair, so I spurred up to it. We had a nice little go. And my brother said to me, "Get on home." I said, "No." I said, "I'm going to stick it." And when we come in the morning, he was about 30, this blacksmith. He said, "Good morning, Jim." "Good morning, Jim." Just so nothing happened.
Working conditions were hard for all young men, and there was little leisure time. By the summer of 1914, Alfred Anderson had become an apprentice coffin maker. He'd also joined the Territorial Army, because their summer camp offered his only chance of a holiday. Unaware that war was just about to break out, he was on manoeuvres in the Highlands.
And it was a very good day, and the order was Church Leaf Parade for a march. Oh, it was very, very hot indeed.
On their march through the parched lanes, Alfred's platoon came across a local photographer. He was to capture forever a remarkable moment of youthful innocence.
So that was when the photograph was taken. That was our platoon. Most of them were buddies, as it were. So I went to school. You played football with them and everything. Oh, yeah, we were all together.
The platoon of friends was commanded by the same Sergeant Beverley, who 12 years earlier had carried young Alfred on his shoulders. They had no idea they would soon be fighting side by side for their country. For as they continued their exercise, German troops were marching into Belgium, and on August the 4th, Britain declared war on Germany and her allies.
The first thing we knew was the sergeant's mess went amok. And we couldn't make out what it was about until they told us the war was on. And it was a great surprise to us.
These 30 men would be some of the first British troops to fight the Kaiser's army. Few of them would come through the next 4 years unscathed. By October, 750,000 had volunteered to fight for their country. Percy Wilson remembered the recruiting sergeant's call, the naive hope it would be over in a few months.
Join up, you'll all be back by Christmas. But he never said what Christmas was going to be back.
As the wave of patriotism overwhelmed the country, Arthur Hailstrap found himself with a dilemma. He wanted to stop German aggression, but as a Christian, he thought the church should oppose the war.
I was then the secretary of a Bible class, but I criticised the church for not protesting at two Christian nations fighting one another. And I had already volunteered for the army. But it's a paradox perhaps, but that's how I felt. I never felt any real animosity towards the enemy except for their bosses. You know, the Kaiser and his clique.
Claude Schulz, like hundreds of thousands of teenagers, saw a chance for adventure. Known to everyone as Tommy Atkins, he already had the right nickname, but it didn't guarantee him a place in the army.
I said I wanted to join the army as a bugler boy, because I knew the army had bugler boys. I was still at school, I was under 14. And he said, Oh, he said, Tommy boy, they call me Tommy. He said, Tommy boy, you're too young. And he said, you're not big enough yet to join the army. But he said, you come and see me next year and I'll recruit you then.
Many of those actually old enough to enlist were small and physically unfit, the result of bad housing and poor diet. Percy Wilson's corporal wasn't impressed with his new recruits.
He'd stand this stick under his arm and give you a sort of a lecture. When I was a boy, my father bought me a box of toy soldiers. Some got broken, some got lost. And he'd hesitate a bit. Now, he said, I found the bloody lot again.
For one Tommy, the training camp was a less intimidating place. At a party, Arthur Hailstrap met a girl who would later become his wife.
She was sitting on the knee of the, I found out afterwards, was the son of the major in charge of everything in the town. And I took her off that knee and put her on mine. And from that moment, we were sort of together.
The only way of meeting up again with his new girlfriend was to sneak out of his barracks.
At night time, after a rally, I knew the times of the pickets, and I would go out into the garden, jump over the fence, and I would spend a couple of hours or so at my friend's house, at my girlfriend's house. I would get back at probably about 2 in the morning, or sometimes 3.
Even though Arthur never got caught, he paid the price of too many sleepless nights.
On the day that I was posted, I was so tired that I collapsed on parade, and I heard a voice say, "Clear that body out of the way and close ranks. Number!"
Oh, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now they go one arm and one down. 1.
At the age of 106, Arthur Barraclough still lived with his wife Mary in Morecambe.
4.
Arthur always prided himself on his fitness.
8, 9, 10.
And when he underwent training, he found himself protecting his friend Harry Slater from a bully.
I said, if that fella comes over here and touches your bed, oh man, I said, I'll slaughter him. He said, oh, no, I said, he's a big villain. Leave him alone. I said, no, by that time I was a very useful young man.
The chance to sort the bully out came in a boxing match.
I only hit him about twice, and then he started taking the gloves off. So I said, what's gone wrong? Oh, he said, I've hurt my hand. So we burst his balloon. After that, he didn't try and bully anybody because they all knew he was a big duck egg, you know.
Arthur Barraclough and Harry Slater remained inseparable until they were split up in France when Harry was drafted into another battalion. He was killed in 1918.
We heard a bit later they'd been bashed a bit and Harry had been killed. And so that was a really bad blow for me. And I was his champion, you see.
In his nursing home, Harry Patch, well into his 3rd century, had found a new girlfriend in Doris Whittaker.
Well, somebody asked, why didn't we get married? I said, what, 103, marry in 89. I said, the television would have a Beano on it. I said, no, we're all right as we are.
Where'd you get that big puppy from?
At the age of 18, Harry didn't have time for romance. He was training to be a killing machine. He also knew he could increase his wages by 50% if he gained the Cross Guns badge for marksmanship.
I think it was 112 points you had to get for your cross guns. Now, I wasn't interested in the cross guns. I was more interested in the 6 a day extra. I said to the sergeant in charge, this gun is firing high. Can I lower the sights? So he said yes. My next 2 shots were 2 bulls. The next round, I got an inner, another 4. I was 8 points above what I wanted. I said the other 2, I didn't care a damn where they went. I had my cross guns.
Whilst the first wave of Tommy volunteers underwent training, Alfred Anderson headed for France in November 1914. Alfred is the very last of the old Contemptibles, the name that stuck to Britain's original small force after the Kaiser reputedly dubbed it that contemptible little army. At first, Britain could only send 80,000 troops against the might of the Germans' 2 million. Alfred's Black Watch Battalion were reinforcements. They crossed the Channel in a cattle boat.
We had to climb down into the hold where the cattle had been. It was extremely clean, but there was still the smell. Cattle. The crossing was very good because it was very short. It was at the narrowest part of the channel, I would say. And we landed there, of course, in early hours of the morning.
From Calais, Alfred Anderson began the march to the Western Front. For many of the locals, it was their first taste of men in skirts.
And when the residents heard the skirl of the pipes, all came rushing out the houses. And the majority were women, and they came out shouting and screaming and all the like of that. And they weren't particular about clapping you on the back. Had the people below your kilt.
Alfred was heading for the front just as the war became bogged down in winter mud. The Germans had hoped for a quick sweep to victory, but had been halted outside Paris. Both sides began to dig in to protect themselves. Soon a line of trenches extended over 400 miles from the Channel to Switzerland. Alfred and the other Tommies would soon be facing a new, static, but highly mechanized war of attrition. Harry Patch was forewarned of the horrors of trench warfare by his brother.
And he used to tell me what the trenches were like. I didn't want to go. I knew what I was going to. A lot of people didn't. And when they got to France, they had a rude awakening.
85 years after the war, Arthur Hailstrap visited a recently excavated trench.
One of my most vivid memories was of walking on the duckboards. And duckboards are not easy things to walk on anyway, and they weren't very wide.
The duckboards were essential not only inside trenches, but along the supply lines to the front. These were often a quagmire of mud.
And we were told that if anyone fell in, they couldn't be helped because they would sink into the swamp mud. It was so liquid, they would sink into it almost right away. And anyone trying to help them would not only endanger himself, but all those following him, because there's no room to manoeuvre on duckboards.
Even during Arthur's visit, the trenches were still giving up their dead. Some 200,000 Tommies remain lost on the battlefield.
Have they discovered any bodies in them?
Yes, unfortunately they have, Arthur. Are you all right?
I'm getting cold into my chest.
Would you like to go back to the coach?
In November 1914, Alfred Anderson had to dig his own trench.
There was always a guide for pioneers to take you into the section, take you there and show you if they wanted a trench dug, you to dig it.
Was it advantageous to dig quickly?
Oh, aye. Especially when there's bullets flying overhead. When you hear it going, you know it's past. So that was a mess.
Alfred settled down to life as a batman, serving officers like Fergus Bowes-Lyon. He was the eldest brother of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and was to be killed at the Battle of Lewes in 1915. 85 years later, Alfred's experience led to a surprise private visit from Prince Charles. A proud moment for Alfred and his family.
We asked him, well, how were you with him? Well, I just talked to him as if he was a senior officer. And Charles sat on the edge of the chair and talked to Dad quite naturally. A cup of tea, Earl Grey, with honey. So, Dad was really chuffed, you know, about that. The only thing Charles regretted, and he said to Dad, is not being able to go home and tell Mother that I've met you.
Your grandmother?
My grandmother, yeah. And of course Dad always gets the telegram from the Queen.
Oh,
As
yeah.
you see, it always sits on top of the TV. And he said to Charles, your mother's never far away because I look at her every morning.
Back in 1914, Alfred was getting used to trench life on the Western Front. He was just one in a force that peaked at over 2 million fighting men. And they all had to be fed and watered every day.
They used to bring the water up to us in anything that would hold water, usually a petrol can. And if you've been there long enough, you could tell by the taste of the water whether it come up in a BP can or a shell.
We used to drink all the dirty water you could find. Anywhere. Just move the top away and drink it. Because we didn't get issued very much water. Anything from half pint to a pint. And we had to shave, wash, everything on that. And cook our meals, soak their biscuits.
The army-issue biscuits were so hard that Tommies used to carve photograph frames out of them. The diet was poor and monotonous, mainly tinned beef, known universally as bully.
We got a tin of bully to share for 4 men. And so, you know, tins of bully, they have a little key at the bottom. That key was always missing. You had to chop it open with a bayonet. It was a terrible job. We lost as much meat as what we got.
And there were the inevitable consequences of a diet of beef and biscuits.
I'd been to the toilet for 3 days, so I had, what am I going to do?
The last surviving veteran of the Royal Flying Corps, Charles Watson, had to make do with what was at hand. Airplane engines were then lubricated with vegetable oil.
I tried to have nearly half of this engine oil. I got about 3 parts down. I had been back to the tent for about half an hour, and I had to go very, very quick, and I tell you. You try a little bit of castor oil from an engine or engines. You don't be constipated after that for a bit.
Have a try, sir. You want to get your jug out? Aye.
Many battalions introduced a special supplement to the rations to keep spirits up.
In the morning, you had the orders to stand to. That's on the firing stand. That's just high enough to get your rifle in position, see? And the captain, lieutenant and the sergeant would come on every morning and give you a tot of rum. I say, stand down.
By late 1914, it was obvious. The Tommies wouldn't be going home for Christmas. The war was deadlocked. As the promise of quick victory evaporated, the Tommies realized that they would be facing the devastating new warfare of heavy artillery and machine guns for some time to come. But in the late afternoon of Christmas Eve 1914, the guns fell silent for the first time in 5 months. Alfred Anderson is the last surviving Tommy who witnessed the extraordinary events that followed.
We heard the complete silence, and we all came out of the billets and stood on the road outside and listened. There was not a sound to be heard for a while, nothing. And then we heard some cheering.
An unofficial truce had broken out against the wishes of the generals on both sides. Men swapped presents of what little they had. They even played football together. The Bedfordshire Regiment lost 3-2 to the Germans. The game only stopped when the ball burst on barbed wire. In some areas, the truce lasted just a few hours. In others, until New Year's Day. It was a remarkable display of humanity.
No war.
But it couldn't stop the growing atrocity of the war. Alfred still has his own memento of Christmas 1914.
We got that from Princess Mary, full of cigarettes.
But you didn't smoke, did you?
No, we didn't smoke. one of the other boys smoked for me.
That's. You might as well have them. Without any smoke. Come on.
Gave them to anybody that wanted them. They said it's good for the nerves. Well, I used to say, I haven't got any nerves.
Even though the cigarettes were useless to Alfred, the tin from Princess Mary came in handy.
You see the Bible there? That was a present from my mother who we left on the embarkation. And I carried it in my breast pocket. I found out that the Bible fitted the box perfectly. So I put the Bible in the box and kept it there all the time, and I was even able to bring it home after being wounded.
After the calm of the Christmas truce, it wasn't long before Alfred was back in action. In 1915, his Black Watch Regiment was involved in some of the fiercest fighting of the war so far. He was about to go over the top, the defining experience for the Tommy throughout World War I. An artillery barrage to soften up enemy positions would precede the infantry attack. The Tommies were about to leave the safety of the trenches and face the enemy's fire. Arthur Barrowclough survived going over the top 6 times.
I always used to just stand still for a minute and just say this little prayer, and I'll never forget it. Dear God, I'm going into grave danger. Please help me to act like a man and come back safe. Being it. It's very funny that just that perfect little prayer put me where I am now, in this little chair.
In 1915, Alfred Anderson witnessed the full effect of modern artillery at the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle. In the 35-minute barrage before the attack, more shells were fired than in the entire Boer War.
The trenches that we were attacking were mostly blown away. They could fire accurately with these shells, I'm telling you.
Even though the German defences had been devastated, they still had numerous machine guns, to which the Black Watch had no effective reply.
We ought to have had more machine guns. We'd only 1 or 2 per battalion. And the Jerry had 1 for every section, I think.
In one battle in 1915, a 1,000-strong Black Watch battalion was reduced to 300 men. When Harry Patch went over the top for the first time, it changed his life forever.
I came across a Cornishman. He was ripped from his shoulder to his waist, shrapnel. No bullet wound is clean. Shrapnel will tear you all to pieces. He was laying there in a pool of blood. As we got to him, he said, "Shoot me." He was beyond all human aid. Before we could shoot him, he died. I was with him in the last seconds of his life, when he went from this life to whatever is beyond. Now what I saw in the way of sights at Passchendaele and at Pilkem, the wounded lying about, asking you for help, we didn't have the knowledge, the equipment, or the time to spend with them. I lost all my faith in Church of England. And when that fella died, he just said one word, "Mother." It wasn't a cry of despair. It was a cry of surprise and joy. I think, although I wasn't allowed to see her, I am sure his mother was in the next world to welcome him. And he knew it. I was just allowed to see that much and no more. And from that day until today, when now I'm nearly 106 years old, I shall always remember that cry, and I shall always remember that death is not the end.
It's his grave, is it, or his memorial?
It's his grave, I think.
In November 2003, Arthur Hailstrap visited the German war cemetery of Langemarck in Belgium. He wanted to lay a wreath on the grave of a fellow engineer who'd fought for the other side on the Western Front.
It's quite heavy, Arthur.
But hold my stick for me.
I've got it.
And you hold me.
I will.
Right.
I've got you.
Right. Now I'll lay the dust here.
On the stone, yeah.
When my friends and I used to talk about the enemy sometimes, and we used to say to one another, well, I suppose they're doing the same as we're doing, fighting for their country. And that's the sort of sympathy we had for one another. And I still have it, because I do not believe in war. Take my hat off. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. I'm glad of that.
Langemarck Cemetery alone holds the bodies of over 40,000 men. The war on the Western Front was to claim nearly 5 million lives on both sides. By 1916, Alfred Anderson had become trusted batman to his old Etonian Company commander, Lieutenant Ian Bruce Gardine. One morning in March, they'd just come back from a dangerous patrol unscathed.
And when daylight came, we started to brew up. And I was brewing up for Lieutenant Bruce Gazine and myself. And a shell came over, burst over his head. The first thing I can remember is flat out, no, not on the fire, at the side of the fire. And some of our lads had been in the open trench. 2 or 3 of them killed outright.
And where were you hit?
Hit in the back of the neck, where it sores now.
The wound was serious enough for Alfred to be sent home. He's not been abroad since. The shrapnel may have saved Alfred's life. He would now escape the deadly war of attrition that was escalating on the Western Front.
You happy there, or do you want to come and sit there?
That's okay, thank you.
85 years after he was wounded, Alfred was honoured by the French people.
That's the Legion of Honour.
But the award couldn't soften the loneliness of outliving his generation.
But there's none of my old mates alive. Not one. Of course, you see, I was young when the war started, only 18. So you need to be a pretty old man to outlive me.
Some of the other Tommies, like Harry Patch, would question why they were fighting the war.
Used to look between the firing apertures, and all you could see was a couple of stray dogs out there fighting over a biscuit that they'd found. They were fighting for their lives. And the thought came to me, there were we, 2 civilized nations, British and German, and what were we doing? We're in a lousy, dirty trench, fighting for our lives. For what? For 18 pence a flippin' day.
Ypres in Belgium on Armistice Day 2003, the anniversary of when the guns fell silent. The Menin Gate is one of the memorials to Tommies still lost on the battlefield. There are over 50,000 names on its walls. Arthur Hailstrap's annual pilgrimage is coming to a close. It's a day of deep reflection for Arthur. He's honouring not only his fallen comrades, but his only son, John Philip, who was killed aged 20 in the Second World War.
We protected our country, we preserved our identity as a nation so that future generations could live and prosper. And they have done, and many of them don't remember that, but they don't realise that they owe everything to the millions who had volunteered to protect our identity as Englishmen or as British. I'm an Englishman. Despite the fact that I like a job of gin now and again.
He was already planning to return next year, when he'd be 106. Alfred Anderson returned home in 1916, he had one last mission: to pay his condolences to the family of a fallen comrade, Lion Jeffrey. Alfred considered himself a friend of the whole family.
And I went away round to Lion's house, where he had 3 sisters.
After Alfred had been wounded, Lion had taken his job as batman. Shortly afterwards, Lion had been killed.
The youngest sister came to the door. And she said, "Oh, it's you, is it?" I said, "That's no very good reception, mate." I said, "I came to pass my condolences to the whole family."
For Lion's sisters, Alfred had cheated death by being wounded. Their brother, who'd taken Alfred's place, had not been so lucky.
"Why don't you let me in?" "Oh, well," she said, "you're here and he's no." We were always together. I suppose that hit me too. But she was just taking it out on me. All these years, I've been trying to forget. Here's all been raked up again. I thought I was going to die peacefully.
By the spring of 1916, Alfred Anderson's war was over. But for the rest of the Tommies, the worst was yet to come. In the final program, the Tommies faced their darkest hour in the Battle of the Somme. 20,000 slaughtered in less than 8 hours. And as the war continues for another 2 years, many more lose their closest comrades.
September the 22nd, 10:30 at night. That's when I lost him. That's my Remembrance Day.
Others spearhead the final 100-day assault on the Germans, sweeping all before them in the most successful British military campaign ever.
I found the German's machine gun. I put my hand on the grips, pressed the centre with me thumbs, and the belt was dancing like a snake until he finished. I don't have it.
And as one by one the remaining Tommies pass away, Harry Patch makes one final pilgrimage to face his past and meet the enemy.
And that's next Tuesday here on BBC One at 9 o'clock.
Between 1914 and 1918, an entire generation of young men served king and country. Over 5.5 million British soldiers fought in the First World War. It's the biggest fighting force Britain has ever assembled. Each on enlistment became Tommy Atkins, the nickname given by the army to its soldiers. The Tommies were the first to face the horrors of modern war. Over 700,000 were killed by heavy artillery, gas, and machine guns. Many more were wounded. And when filming began in 2003, time had whittled this great army of millions down to just 27 survivors. All of them were centenarians. The oldest, 107. The youngest, 102. They lived through some of the most appalling experiences of the 20th century.
No man's land was full of dead bodies, and the smell in the summer, oh, stink like the devil.
They faced terrible choices.
He said, shoot me. He was beyond all human aid.
These men were born when Queen Victoria was still on the throne. Jim Lovell was the last surviving decorated Tommy from the 1914-18 war. He started school like the rest of the Tommies at the age of 4.
We didn't have pens, we had slates with sand on, and we had a mark in the sand, writing in the sand, see, and just shake it to cover it again, see, and then we write again. We never had no paper, just a sand and a stick.
The first hour on a Thursday was geometry. Now you gave us a question. What was the shortest distance between A and B? Of course, the answer is a straight line. So what's the definition of a curve? Well, I'd forgotten it. I said a straight line called bending, and I had a rap for that.
When we come home from school, we had to take our boots off and run about with no boots at all on. And we used to play in the road, all sorts of games. Of course, a pair of boots cost 12 and 6 then, 12 and 6.
For Jim Lovell's dad, 12 and 6 was 2 weeks' wages. The quest to find the last British survivors of the First World War. The memories of war came more easily for Arthur Hale Strap, who was born in 1898.
Too far. Too far.
That's it.
2 years ago, he began his 30th pilgrimage to the battlefields of Belgium and northern France to honor his fallen comrades.
May I give you a kiss?
One.
Oh, many as you like.
And again.
No order.
His first act of remembrance was a service at Poppering in Belgium, in an attic once used as a chapel by British soldiers. He'd always walked up the 4 floors, but now he had to accept a lift from the Belgian Fire Brigade.
Thank you. Beautifully done.
Arthur may have been frail, but he was determined not to forget.
But I need a volunteer. Do you mind volunteering?
What for?
Yeah. No, for the exhortation.
Oh, no, of course. Anytime.
No, the Padre was saying...
His childhood had ended abruptly on the killing fields of the Western Front. Yet he'd grown up expecting to fight for king and country. Some of his earliest memories were of service to the British Empire.
When I was about 3 years old, I was dressed in petticoats and skirts. And
lives span 3 centuries. Their deaths will cut forever our last connection with a distant age. Soon the final platoon of 27 veterans will be gone. Now, they tell their story for the final time. Harry Patch, one of the 27 veterans. He witnessed the horrors of Passchendaele, but for 80 years he kept his First World War memories a secret. Only when he went into a nursing home at the age of 100 was Harry forced to face his war demons.
For 80 years, I never watched a war film. I never spoke of it, not to my wife.
But when night staff turned on the light in a store cupboard, the flash penetrated through a skylight into Harry's room and his dreams.
If I was half asleep, the flash of the bomb. That flash brought it all back.
I remember letters coming from my father's two brothers from the South African Boer War. And I remember the excitement at home when those letters arrived.
The Boer War had a profound effect on Arthur's generation. It was a reminder that they were expected to fight for Britain's empire. In 2003, on the edge of the Highlands, the oldest of the Tommies was still living independently.
Right, Dad. Just got to check the clock, all right?
Alfred Anderson was then aged 107. His eldest son, Jim, was 79.
Funny to think of your son being retired, isn't it? Oh. I'm supposed to be the oldest man in Scotland.
But Alfred could still remember the day in 1902 when victorious British troops returned home from the Boer War. He was 6 years old.
This Sergeant Beverly picked me up and put me on his shoulders and carried me down the street.
12 years later, at the outbreak of the First World War, Alfred was to become a soldier in the same Black Watch regiment, and Sergeant Beverly was to be his platoon sergeant.